Hello and welcome. You're watching WION Fine Print with me, Molly Gambhir. The outgoing president of the United States, Donald Trump, has now approved a state of emergency declaration for Washington till the 24th of January. This comes after authorities warned of security threats to Biden's presidential inauguration. The White House released the press report on Trump's approval of emergency ahead of Biden's inauguration on the 20th of January.
I'm not afraid of taking the oath outside, and we've been getting briefed, but I think it's critically important that there be a real serious focus on holding those folks who engage in sedition and threaten people's lives, deface public property, cause great damage, that they be held accountable. And I think that's a view that is held by the vast majority of Democrats and Republicans in the Congress.
Washington remains on high alert ahead of that much-awaited event. The FBI has warned of possible armed protests being planned for Washington, D.C. and all 50 state capitals. The warnings are in the run-up to President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration scheduled for the 20th of January. Tourists have been barred from visiting the Washington Monument due to these threats of more violence, specifically from Trump's loyalists. 2 members of the Capitol Police have been suspended, meanwhile, in connection with the Capitol Hill attack last week. The U.S. presidential inauguration traditionally draws hundreds of thousands of visitors to the U.S. Capitol, but the ceremonies have been scaled back dramatically this time because of the pandemic. And let's go straight across now to our correspondent Simon Marks, joining us from Washington, D.C. for more on that. Hi, Simon. At least 10,000 National Guard troops from several states will be in place for U.S. President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration in Washington. Bring us up to speed with the arrangements that are being made to tighten security ahead of that event, keeping in mind the threats of violence after the Capitol Hill attack last week.
Yeah, absolutely. And those moves to enforce essentially fortress-like conditions here in Washington, D.C. are happening very quickly. FBI agents at one point yesterday were going door to door in Washington in a bid to gather information about the participants in last Wednesday's armed insurrection on Capitol Hill. 45,000 tips have been received by the FBI and other law enforcement agents as they begin law enforcement operations in 30 separate American states to arrest those Trump supporters responsible for what took place at the U.S. Capitol last Wednesday. And just consider the sort of absurdity of the position in which we currently find ourselves. President Trump last night at the White House, as you said, Molly, authorized a federal declaration of emergency in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Capitol, that has been entirely sparked by his own incitement of a mob to engage in a riot on Capitol Hill last week, with now threats of at least 3 separate further incidents in the days ahead that Capitol Police have warned lawmakers about here, including plans to kidnap and execute lawmakers. That coupled with the FBI alert to every single jurisdiction across the United States that there are plans to launch attacks in 50 state capitals, the capital of each individual state, between now and the inauguration. And yet from the President of the United States, who has declared this federal emergency to deal with the illegal activities of his own supporters, not a single public plea to those supporters to stand down, desist, abandon any plans that they may have to launch fresh violent assaults. It's extraordinary.
Right. Stay with me, Simon. Calls, of course, have also been growing for the removal of Donald Trump. Democrats in the U.S. House of Representatives plan to start impeachment proceedings on Wednesday unless outgoing President Donald Trump steps down or is removed. Donald Trump has been accused of inciting violence ahead of the Capitol Hill attack last week. Republican congressional leader Kevin McCarthy, meanwhile, has told lawmakers that Donald Trump acknowledged that he bears some responsibility for that attack on U.S. Capitol. McCarthy reportedly had a long conversation with Donald Trump over the phone. McCarthy reportedly said, I'm quoting now from his statement, "I have been very clear to the president. He bears responsibility for his words and actions. I asked him personally if he holds responsibility for what happened, if he feels bad about what happened. He told me he does have some responsibility. I asked him personally, call Joe Biden for the sake of this nation." Vice President Mike Pence has been, meanwhile, requested to invoke the 25th Amendment. If he does not respond to that request, Democrats will take the matter into their own hands, which means they will start the impeachment procedure. And with this move, Donald Trump would become the first president in American history to be impeached twice. If Donald Trump is impeached, the Senate would hold a trial to decide whether to convict or remove him from office. It is unlikely that the proceedings would conclude before Trump's term in office expires. Meanwhile, Trump and Pence reportedly met on Monday evening in the Oval Office. This was their first encounter since last week's assault on the U.S. Capitol. Officials said that the two had a good conversation and that they reiterated that those who broke the law and stormed the Capitol last week do not represent the country. Going back across now to Simon Marks. Simon, the House Democrats have given that ultimatum to Vice President Mike Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment. Like we've been discussing, there is a very bleak chance that that ultimatum will actually work. Where do things stand as far as the attempts to impeach Donald Trump are concerned?
Well, the Democrats, Molly, say they're ready to go, and they're ready to go possibly as early as Wednesday here in Washington, D.C. They've already charged the president. I mean, the documents are there. They accuse President Trump of insurrection. It's just one charge that is being leveled against him. And the Democrats know they've got the votes to pass that impeachment vote in the House of Representatives. So the question then becomes, well, what happens next? Does the president go on trial in the Senate? Time is obviously short. We're 8 days away from Joe Biden's inauguration here in Washington. Democrats say they are going to attempt to try and get the trial to start immediately, but that looks like a very long shot move by Democrats, who may have to decide after Joe Biden is sworn in, after Donald Trump leaves office, whether then to advance the impeachment process by putting the man who would by then be former President Donald Trump on trial in the Senate. And you might say, well, what would be the point of that? He couldn't lose office because he would already have left office. Well, the point from a Democrat perspective and from the perspective of some Republicans is that were he to be convicted at trial in the Senate, he would be banned from ever seeking elected office in the United States again. And all of this is playing out at a point where President Trump's supporters are clearly demonstrating to American society at large that Donald Trump personally still commands the personal loyalty and support of millions of Americans from coast to coast. So for Republicans especially, but Democrats as well, that decision about how or whether or when to put Donald Trump on trial in the Senate is a very, very complicated nettle to grasp.
All right, leaving it there for the moment. Simon, thanks very much for joining us with all of those updates.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.